Okay.
All right, this is an interview with Edward Bloch, New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York, 22nd of March, 2004, approximately 2 p.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Sure. My full name is Edward J. Bloch, B-L-O-C-H, and I was born April 17th, 1924 in New York City.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering military service?
Well, I went through, finished high school and elementary school before that, of course. And then I put in, I guess, about 2.5 years at Williams College. And from there on, the war started earlier than that, and that is World War II. And so I signed up with the Marine Corps, and I went from there to V-12 school.
Can I go back a second?
Sure.
Do you remember where you were and your reaction when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yes, I was a freshman at Williams, and I remember Dave Greenbaum coming up the stairs and talking about the fact that Pearl Harbor had taken place.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was as shocked as everybody else. Actually, I felt that the war, our participation in the war could not and should not be avoided. So, in a way, it was a mixed reaction on my part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you enlisted in the Marine Corps. Why did you enlist and why did you select the Marine Corps?
Well, to make a long story short, I guess I was one of those who was trying to prove myself. Okay, actually, my father used to spoke German fluently and used to listen to Hitler on shortwave, and I understood German too. And the thing that got me, I'm of Jewish ethnic extraction, and the thing that got to me was that Hitler said that Jews are gutless, don't have any courage. So, retrospectively, I know now that I was not only trying to prove myself, but to him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That was not the case.
All right. Where were you inducted and where did you go for your basic training?
To the best of my recollection, I was inducted in New York City, but I could be wrong about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you say basic training, well, they had this V-12 program, which was actually in uniform.
Mm-hmm.
So that was at Dartmouth College, and I remember that Dartmouth, for the only time in its history, I believe, had the best football team in the United States because all these guys came in from the Navy and Marine Corps. So when I actually went to basic training, it was at Parris Island, and that, I believe, was 2 semesters later after being at the V-12 school in Dartmouth.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't learn much at Dartmouth. To my mind, it was a wasted proposition. I mean, we drilled a little bit, but they took the position that in order to do a good job as a rifle platoon leader, you had to know about the Battle of Trafalgar and a whole lot of things I haven't heard about since. But so actually, many of us felt that it was a waste of time.
Were you taking college courses
Yes,
at the time and
yes,
then that also?
yes. And credit courses,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you went to your basic training, you were an officer then?
No,
Or
no, I was a private.
Private.
Yep. And throughout the V-12, all of us were privates.
Mhm.
And in fact, we were, I guess we did get our first stripe, PFC. Can't remember just when that occurred, but I certainly was no higher than PFC all the way through Paris Island. And well, then the next thing that happened was a senior officer came to speak to all of us, and sort of a 90-day wonder thing. I mean, they were pushing us through, because at the Battle of Tarawa, they hadn't foreseen the role that the Reefs would play in landing. They had to wade in at Tarawa, and a lot of rifle platoon leaders got knocked off, so that they couldn't graduate them fast enough at Quantico. So they, I believe, the only time in the history of this country, they set up a special OCS school at Camp Lejeune. And because they called us, we were in a special class, we felt special.
Mhm. So you went to Lejeune then for officer?
Right, it was, right, I guess they called it OCS at that point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, how long was that curriculum? That program?
Gee, let's see now. I would think that was probably somewhere beginning in the winter of '44, and we didn't graduate from the OCS until the fall of that year.
Okay.
That was, let's see, they call, after you're commissioned, of course there was the special ceremony, some funny things happened then. They have some kind of a postgraduate officers school. I forget what they called it. So we were there until then.
Okay. And from there, where did you go?
Okay, from there, when we were commissioned, we got a leave, and it was supposed to be for 2 weeks, but then we got a telegram on leave to report back to Lejeune by the most direct means possible. And we were supposed to be in Lejeune for a while longer, but instead of that, I got there, I think I arrived something like 2 o'clock in the morning, and the train left at 6 for the West Coast. So we just changed our things and took off.
Once you reached the West Coast, where did you?
Went to Camp Pendleton, and let's see now. We had just missed the ship we had expected to be on. So we were in the 23rd, whatever it was, battalion or something, for transit, and we just hung around wasting time in Pendleton. Didn't really do much training, as a matter of fact. And then on December 11th, 1944, we left on General M.M. Patrick. And interestingly enough, some of those on board were the code talkers, the Navajo.
Oh.
And they would not speak to us. I was supposed, because my name began with B, to conduct exercise courses, because when when you're aboard ship, you really need to do something. And they wouldn't come. And I didn't know what to do about that. I reported, and he said, forget it. So that was that. But later on, we found out who they were. Very impressive group.
They basically stayed by themselves?
They definitely stayed by themselves, yeah. Mostly playing checkers over and over and over again without many words being spoken.
How long were you at sea, and did you
Uh,
go to Hawaii or start
Well,
out?
we had a case of spinal meningitis aboard, and, well, we went without a convoy because our ship went 32 knots, which was much faster than most ships, and we could outrun most submarines if any showed up, and they didn't. Spinal meningitis, and there was another reason too, but I can't think why. We did put in at Pearl Harbor only for the spinal to take them off, and never got off the ship, and then left for Puvuvu.
Could you see any, the damage from 1941, was that still evident in Pearl Harbor?
Not where we were. I'm sure I would have remembered it if I'd seen it, and I just don't. We might have arrived in the dead of night, or, I just don't remember the details.
Okay.
I do remember people who were on their way home yelling up, "You'll be sorry, you'll be sorry." So we were there a very short time, took on supplies and some other things, and then left for Puvuvu. Puvuvu is in the Russell Islands, and I believe they're in the Southern Solomons, though I'm not sure.
What did you do there?
Okay, we had pretty intensive training there. We were told when we landed, this is one of the great successes of the intelligence, we were told we were going to attack Formosa. And all the plans were laid out, complete plans down to the last sea ration, knowing that the Japanese intelligence would get a hold of those plans. And sure enough, they moved 60,000 troops from Okinawa to Formosa. So then we were at sea for a long time. We stopped for a final assault mock-up at Guadalcanal. It was 135 degrees there. And the Army did not, they closed down for that day, but we didn't. And from there it was Ulithi and Okinawa on April 1st.
Were you in the first wave or
11th wave.
11th wave?
Yeah. I was in the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. And the battalion was in reserve at that point. 2 battalions were 1st, 3rd in reserve. And there was another thing too. It's one of the things nobody bothered to tell us. We could see on the way in that there were a lot of things bobbing in the surf. And we just heard about Tarawa, and actually, the other operation, can't think of the name of it, it'll come to me, but not now, where there were a lot of injuries and deaths in the landing.
Enowetok?
No, it was
That's like
Palau's Island,
Honolulu?
Peleliu.
Peleliu, okay.
Thank you. So we thought their bodies, actually they were just life vests that were thrown off. Our landing was unopposed to all intents and purposes. I think we had one injury, that was all. Anyway, it's very light. And the night before we landed, the divers, the guys with guts, they swam in and looked around and spotted things, and they said all of the gun emplacements that had been targeted were not destroyed. And of course, the battle wagons, the heavy ships, had been pounding for, I don't know, a day and a half or something like that. But these swimmers said the gun emplacements were not destroyed. However, it turned out they were not gun emplacements, but burial vaults. So it was, the landing itself was very, very, almost unopposed. Partly I suspect, partly as a result, because of the transferal of the Japanese troops from Okinawa to Formosa.
Okay, could you describe how you felt entering combat for the first time? When you were under fire for the first time?
Yeah, well, we felt triumphant because we landed. You know, that was the first thing. We had been expecting all kinds of trouble there, and it didn't happen. At that point, I think at least our battalion, maybe the 7th Marines, went north, which was lightly defended. It wasn't anywhere near as heavily defended as the south, where the Shuri line was well established. So we actually, in the initial stages, were not doing an awful lot. Patrolling, of course, you know, firefights once in a while, but nothing.
So most of your duties were on patrol and fire. Right. You ran into firefights and.
Right. There was no steady line because most of that area was very lightly defended.
I guess just maybe you just relate your experiences while you were on Okinawa then.
Okay, from there, I just don't remember. It happened, my 21st birthday took place on the 17th of April, and so one thing, we were in the hills, and we could see out to sea where the kamikaze were diving, and of course their targets were the ships because they were much better targets, much more fruitful targets than we were. And at the same time you could hear the Japanese digging tunnels underneath us in the hills where we were. It was just a very strange thing. But at any rate, at that point we were transferred to the south where the actual heavy fighting took place. And before we were committed, we were still in reserve, regimental reserve, I think. Yeah, our battalion was in regimental reserve, and I think our company, which was L Company, might also have been in reserve. I'm not sure about that. Well, one thing that happened before we were supposed to get into it, make the attack towards Shuri. It was raining, and the 3rd Platoon, Johnny Stasuli was platoon leader, went into one of the caves with all the squad leaders. Most of the group leaders were in this cave, which we shouldn't have been. And sure enough, it was booby-trapped, and there was an explosion. The bodies flew over our head, and there was nothing left of the 3rd Platoon but very few people, and they were distributed to the 1st and 2nd Platoon. I was 2nd Platoon leader. Arlen Bubeck was the 1st Platoon leader. So that, there was a burial service at that time. It was, before we were actually committed to the front. So it was not a happy time.
I guess just continue with.
Okay, from there on, and well, we knew we were going to attack, and we were coming down off this hill and across a valley and up a place designated as King Ridge, which was just before another ridge with a Japanese name I can't remember. I do sometimes, but not now. And of course, you understand that when these things are going on, there's so much noise, it's hard to figure out what's happening. It turned out that when we approached King Ridge, I remember George he was a Maltese. He was the first up this next King Ridge, and he was killed and fell back. It was a pretty precipitous ridge. And next was Frosty Williams. He did the same. And, well, nobody seemed to go forward at that point, so I went up. Well, this was quite a dramatic thing for me personally. I got up to the top and looked out. I think Wana Ridge was the next ridge. W-A-N-A, I think we spelled it. And I looked out because we were supposed to take that too. It turned out that what happened was the rest of the platoon had followed up. Oh, the platoon sergeant, Hereford, was hit badly, and so he was out of commission, and the guide, Rag something or other, it turned out that the 4.2 millimeter mortar shells were landing short on us, our own mortar shells. So he, Rag, W-R-A-G-G, he pulled the platoon off the ridge, and there was a cleft at the top of the ridge, and I went down in there for cover. And there was another point where another maybe a dug area transecting it was there, and I didn't realize that the platoon had been pulled back. So I was trying to figure out how we could, the best way we could go up to Wana Ridge. And just at that point, there was what seemed like a thrown, I think it was a landmine, I don't know, but it was shaped like a discus. And I was sort of hypnotized, like a frog and a snake. And it probably wasn't more than a second or two before it exploded, but it exploded. And well, I felt as though my reproductive apparatus was missing. It turned out that what had happened was just hit a nerve. And to tell you the truth, I lost it at that point.
You were hit with shrapnel.
Yeah. And all at once, at the same point, I realized that I was alone. I realized that the rest of the platoon wasn't there. And that didn't help either. So I lost it. I just ran back down the slope we'd come up. And I remember this guy, Darrell Kinzel, of Group 1 in the first squad. And he said, "What are you yelling about?" I said, "My balls are shot off." He said, I don't think so. There's all this stuff going on all overhead. He says, take a look. So with all this stuff going on, I zipped up, took inventory, and it was all there. So, but I was kind of bloodied up, so I didn't know how good or bad shape I was in. And I went back to be checked, and I, shrapnel here and there, and there's some shrapnel surfaced about 20 years later from the gut, but I wasn't seriously injured.
Were you sent back to a hospital ship, or did you?
Not to a hospital ship. I was sent back to field hospital. And incidentally, I was given the Bronze Star for that episode. And the big thing that they wanted to check, well, I don't know, you want to hear all these details, but you know the way the field hospitals were. I mean, those doctors were just absolutely deluged. They didn't have a chance to think, or certainly not get any second opinions. They just did what the instinct told them. And so there was this nurse there, and he said to the nurse, catheterize this man, because they wanted to see if the bladder was torn. And actually, I'd heard about that, and that was a concern. So she started monkeying around with a catheter.
Now this was right on Okinawa.
Oh, yeah.
There were female nurses.
Yes, there were.
On the field.
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And, well, to make a long story short, I came to present arms. And the doctor said, what the hell are you doing over there? Oh, bing, like that. That took care of that. So from there, he did say there was no blood in the bladder. So he said, well, we're just going to check you out for now, and we'll put you in a cot in the field hospital and see how you work out. So I don't remember how long I was there. I know that I was hit on May 9th of that year, and whoever sends the telegrams home reported to my parents that I was wounded on May 9th and returned to duty the same day, which wasn't accurate. But they were quite worried because they didn't hear from me all the while I was in the hospital. There was no way of getting anything done of that sort. And you talk about the nurses, they were the most remarkable people you could imagine. There were so many injuries that typically when somebody would come in with a gut wound, the doctors would do what they had to do in there and not bother to sew them up again because they knew they'd have to come back again. So each day or half a day, the nurses would take the organs out, clean them off, and stick them back in. You know, I don't know how many times this happened, but I couldn't believe when I saw what they were doing. You know.
So everybody was in one huge room, or?
No, just small tents.
Uh-huh.
And penicillin had just been really discovered. So they routinely gave you 8 shots of penicillin a day. And that would mean if you were asleep, they'd just come in and one guy would whack you on the tail and the other would jab it and never woke up. You know, you just got very used to that sort of thing.
How long were you in the field hospital?
I don't remember. It was a matter of weeks, I'm sure. But May 9th this took place, and well, I just don't know. And they would, they would check to see what was happening and if catheterized and stuff like that.
Okay. So you weren't on a catheter at that point?
Oh, no, not content. I mean, they would do it
Uh-huh.
from probably after the first day. They probably did it for a couple of more days,
Mhm.
but that was it as far as I know. Yeah. That was the thing they were still concerned about, was the possibility of a tear in the bladder.
Yeah.
Now, did you ever return to the front then, or?
Yes. Okay, by that point, I was transferred from L Company to K Company. And for a while I was without a platoon, but then I inherited, I don't remember the name of the platoon leader anymore. Oh, yes, it was, yes, it was, a guy from Texas. I inherited the 3rd Platoon of K Company. And we had our night crossing onto Dakeshi Ridge. There were some firefights, but by that point, most of the opposition had subsided, so we were on the offensive all the way. I see. Hiroshima took place on August 6th, so I just don't know how the time passed between May 9th and August. But by August 6th, we were training for an attack. Let's see, the next operation would have been Kyushu, which is the southernmost of the 4 Japanese main islands. That would not have been the 1st Marine Division. That would have been the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions who had been on Iwo. But the one after that, I think was called Coronet, though I'm not sure, would have been on Honshu, the main Japanese island. That's where the center of the government would have been. So that our training was with respect to an expected attack on Honshu, and I don't know when that would have been. Yeah. And that's when we heard about Hiroshima.
What was your reaction to that?
I'll be honest with you, it was mixed. Certainly, it was very clear that the war would be over and our lives would be saved. But a lot of people, including me, were pretty horrified. We had heard that 300,000, it turned out, Japanese had been wiped out. Actually, it was 100,000 or something. But we had heard 300,000, and even though, probably our lives would have been saved by that, there were a number of people, just too horrible to think about. Civilians, of course.
So when the war ended, you ended up in China?
Well, okay, we saw the white plane with the green markings come over, a Japanese plane, to sue for peace. Flew right over Ieshima and over our heads. And, well, then we naturally thought we were going to go home. We were talking about parades and women throwing flowers and kisses and all that business. Instead of which we were sent to China. Told we would be going to China. what the hell was that for? The war was over. So, all right, we went over there, and at the time, well,
Was it the whole division went over? Or
I
just
think
the-
it was the whole division, though I'm not, I know that the 5th Marines were in what at that time was, we called Peiping. They now call it whatever they call it, the capital. They were in that area. I think that the 7th Marines were at a place called Tangshan, which was later wiped out by an earthquake. And that was on the rail line northeast of Qingwantao, which was the port. And we didn't know, what we were supposed to be doing. Well, what they told us was that we were there to help disarm the Japanese. All right. And we were to work with the nationalist troops and another group called the Troops for the Protection of Peace, Order, and Prosperity in the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. It turned out they were Chinese, but they had sided with the Japanese since the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1931. It didn't make an awful lot of sense to us, but there are a lot of things that didn't make an awful lot of sense. Oh, and also, we were to help protect the Ceylon coal mines. And it turned out that they were British-owned, the Ceylon coal mines. And against whom were we supposed to protect the coal mines? Well, from the Chinese. Kailan. And the British, I guess, owned, and they were in top command. The engineers were all Belgians. The British would speak to the Belgians by their first name. The Belgians would say Mr. to the English. And of course, the language was English. So some of those mines were right there in Tangshan, and we were deployed. First, we were in overnight in the racetrack. No, I guess that was in Tencent. Yeah, we landed near Tencent, stayed overnight in the racetrack, and then moved on to Tangshan. I'm sure by train, though I don't remember that. And
Did you say what kind of mine it was?
the coal mine.
Coal mine, okay, I
Yeah.
thought you said that.
And then I guess for a while we didn't do an awful lot. At any rate, then we were told what we had to do was protect the railroad against derailments and destruction of the railroad. So in our battalion area of the railroad, which ran north into Mukden and Harbin in Manchuria, there were 3 bridges, one at Lutai, one at Hangkou, and one at Beitang. I did remember the names this time. And so that each company, I company, K company, and L company, would be responsible for one of the 3 bridges and rotate platoons in their guard. And ours was Hankou, the middle one. So on this one particular day, my platoon, the 3rd platoon, was, Wilson. Wilson was the former platoon leader, Jack Wilson, from Texas. My platoon was going to protect the Hankou Bridge from destruction. And so we got on the train, and the I Company platoon got off at Lutai. We got off at Hankou, and then the train kept on in a southwesterly direction, where the Beitang Bridge was there for I Company, where a platoon of theirs would do the bridge guard. Well, the whole of North China, at least that part of it, is quite flat. And so even though they were a long way off, we could see the train going down there, and we heard there was an explosion, and the train was derailed. And so there was another train coming along. I stopped them, put a gun to the engineer's head, and said, wherever you're pointed, I didn't say, but we were going to get 2 squads ready. The other squad stayed on the bridge. We were going to go down there. So we did. And the engineer, I don't know, whatever he thought, he did it. And we got down to where the explosion was, and we got off. Now, that platoon was Ben Taylor's platoon from my company. Ben is dead. So we lined up along the railroad embankment, and the engine had been derailed. I think most of the cars had not. And I don't know what we were going to do, but we stayed there. And a minute or two later, one of these troops for the preservation of peace, order, and prosperity in the greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere, the puppets showed up with arms. They had fought with on the side of the Japanese for 14 years against their own country. And a few minutes after that, the Japanese army showed up. And we had supposed, you remember our original mission was to disarm the Japanese. As a matter of fact, at the prisoner compound, there was a single Marine on duty with a telephone, and no barbed wire, no nothing, at least as far as I know. Actually, we were working with them, and whenever there was any kind of a ruckus, I later discovered they would come with us. So here we were lined up on the railroad embankment, and there was a town, I don't know, pretty close, a matter of hundreds of yards, I guess, away. If it had a name, I never knew it. And the Japanese officer in charge, although he spoke no language that we knew, he made clear that the way these things are handled was you fire on this town. So, and we had brought a machine gun squad with us, and the Japanese had Nambus, machine guns, and the rest of us had small arms fire. I carried a Tommy gun, and we just fired on this village. I don't know like we didn't do any body count or anything of that sort. We just fired for a period of time. I don't know how long it was. And after a while, the Japanese guy who knew what it was all about, he stopped firing, and the rest of us stopped. And to tell you the truth, I've thought of this many times since then. I don't know the rest of it. I mean, somehow we got back to our Hankou Bridge. I assume it was by the train that brought us down, but I don't remember it. And I don't know whether if the I Company got to the Beitong Bridge, I just don't know. I mean, at this point, I don't remember. I probably knew at the time, but we got back to our bridge guard, and I didn't think that much of it, you know, tell you the truth, I really did not. And the bridge guard was a very difficult thing because patrolling at night, for example, you had to walk from one tie to the next, and it was, you could slip. Nobody did, but, and then another thing that happened was, just verbal orders now. We got word that it might have been earlier. Nobody goes under the bridge at night. Well, as it happened, this bridge was over a river, and the farmers did not have motorboats. They would have to go with the tide. And they would, that is, the Chinese farmers would go under the, that's the way they got there. And so I gave orders, 2 warning shots and the second one between the horns, a third one between the horns. And, you know, I don't remember really any more details than that, but it was just a thing we did. And I guess we were there for probably a week, no more. We'd rotate another platoon in.
How long were you in China?
We went home on points. Actually, I left on January, the end of January. I believe it was January 31st of 46, though I don't know. I had some extra points because I'd been wounded, and so I did not, the people that were on our ship on the way home were not the same group as had gone over.
When were you discharged?
Let's see. Oh, yeah, we got back to, well, actually the same pier that we had left from where's the naval base in California?
Presidio?
No.
Treasure Island? There's one
No,
at Treasure
no.
Island?
There's a big naval base at further south in California.
At San Diego.
Yes,
San Diego, okay.
yes. So we came back to the same, exactly the same piers we'd left from. Just a minute, I'll tell you the date of my... So anyway, I got home. I had visions of lying on the beach for a while and stuff, but my father I had 1 semester left at school, so my father had enrolled me to start, and I know I didn't waste much. So I was, at that point, when I reported the Brooklyn Navy Yard, they told me I was to call every day and report for duty from school and that was it. You know, nobody bothered me, and after a while, well, your eyes are better, somebody's eyes better than mine. I can't figure this out.
Whoa. 18th of May, 46.
Okay, so actually I was in school for a while, you see, before I was actually discharged. I don't know why they did that. I was paid and stuff. Seemed foolish to me, but anyway.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Well, okay, great.
Okay. Saratoga Springs, New York. It is the 7th of May, 2004, approximately 10 a.m. Interview is with Edward Bloch. This is his second interview, first interview, 3/22/04. Well, why don't you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth like we did in the first one.
Okay. Full name is Edward James Bloch. Actually, I adopted the middle name later, and I was born April 17, 1924, in New York City.
Okay. Now, you served in the Marine Corps, World War II.
That's correct.
Okinawa.
Right.
And occupation of China.
That's true.
Okay. Now, you wanted to talk about your experiences in China.
Right. I think during the first interview, described what happened. And I think I said at the time, which was certainly the truth, that I was in charge of my platoon, and even though the others didn't like the idea of firing on a Chinese town with the Chinese puppets who had fought with the Japanese for 14...
Could I go back a little bit,
Sure.
just to relate to the other video? You said your unit, the Japanese surrendered,
Right.
and then you... they were
recount the
rearmed.
whole experience.
Yeah, well, just, they were rearmed, correct? The Japanese were rearmed.
Well, they had plenty of arms left. The Kwantung Army had plenty of arms left, but also their rifle bore was 31 millimeters, and ours was 30, so that they could use our ammunition.
Okay,
My
but
understanding is they did.
they were given their weapons back.
Oh,
you're
yes,
saying.
yes.
Now, why were they given their weapons back?
Well, the determination, from my own point of view, I didn't know all of this at the time, but the surrender ceremony took place in Tenzin, but then, as you say, they picked up their weapons again, those that were involved in the surrender, because the United States, I guess the Marine Corps, needed them to patrol and keep peace, I guess, is what they said, in the area. When our written instructions were given out, we were told to cooperate with the Kuomintang, the nationalist troops, Zheng's troops, and the troops for the preservation of peace, order, and prosperity, the greater East Asia prosperity sphere. Those were the puppets who had sided with the Japanese since the Marco Polo Bridge thing in 1931. As far as the rest were concerned, I don't think the surrender ceremonies involved that many troops. I just don't know. But my guess is that most of the Kwantung Army just remained intact, and they were just waiting there to be shipped home. The war was over, and they were beaten. And,
Now, you said in the previous interview they were, you said keeping order, but they were also patrolling around a British mining interest? Is that true? Or?
No, that was us.
Oh, okay.
One of our orders was to protect the Ceylon mining interest, which was British owned, Belgian engineered, against somebody taking their coal, which I assumed they meant the Chinese. So we didn't understand what that was all about either, but that was the case.
But you received official
We
orders to do this?
Yes, we did. Now, we did not get orders to cooperate with the Japanese Kwantung Army, or elements of it. But that is in fact what happened. There was, we had a single sentry at what they called their compound, which was just where they had been quartered up to that point. And a single sentry is kind of silly, really. He had a telephone, and he could telephone battalion headquarters. But outside of that, I don't imagine he did much, because he couldn't have. So that was the situation.
Now, where did the Japanese Army receive their orders? Who gave them their orders?
I just
Do you
don't know. Haven't any idea. Well, we were told that the Japanese naturally wanted to go home. They were beaten, and they felt there was no point in their staying. But that they were not given shipping. Shipping was probably a bit of a problem, but also they were used. And as a matter of fact, in the book, The United States Marine Corps in World War II, it makes it clear that that was a direct decision on the part of the, I guess the Marine Corps, maybe the government, I don't know.
Now, what was your rank and how large was your unit?
I was a second lieutenant, temporary, when our class graduated, the special OCS class. We were all temporary. Our permanent rank was platoon sergeant, but we were temporarily second lieutenants, and most of us were in charge of a rifle platoon, both on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And that's what I was. I had the, the 3rd platoon in K Company at that point.
Okay, I guess then continue with your...
Okay, well, we had this, briefly I'll recount it. We had in K Company the Hankou Bridge to guard, and the L Company had Lutai, and the I Company had Baitang. So we went down on this day, and the L Company platoon got off at Lutai. We got off at Hankou, and the I Company continued down toward the Baitang Bridge. Then there was an explosion, and the engine was derailed. There was nobody hurt, as far as I knew. We could see north of China is very flat at that place, and we could see something had happened. We didn't know precisely what, because we were at a walkie-talkie range. But at that point, the next train that came through, I stopped them, put a gun to the engineer's head, and said we had 2 squads. Well, I didn't say anything, but indicated we had 2 squads. We're going down. And so we did. And we got off, and there was the I Company platoon with our 2 squads from 3rd platoon. And a little while later, the puppet troops arrived, and a little while after that, the elements of the Japanese Army. And of course, we had no common language, no way of discussing things, but whoever was in charge, the Japanese, let it be known this is the way things were done. The nearest village was just a short distance away, and we directed fire, the 3 of us, the puppets, the Japanese, and us. And at the time, well, it was my responsibility, and I didn't, to my discredit, I didn't question it, I just did it. And that was the thing that that remain with me. Shortly after that incident happened, at the end of January,
Now, when did this happen? Do you remember the date?
my guess is it was something like early November. It might have been October, but it was 1945 for sure. And it would have been down between Hankou and Batam. Shortly after that, well, we were sent home on points, and depending on how many battles we were involved in, if there were any decorations, I had a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, so I had some extra points. And so at the end of January, to the best of my recollection, I was in the group that was sent home.
Can I go back a second? How much of the village was damaged? Was it totally
I
destroyed?
couldn't tell you. We did not do, it later became the
How
thing.
far away were you when you...
I would say maybe 200 yards. They were clearly visible, but we didn't do a body count. We didn't examine it at all. It just happened. I mean, as I recollect it, the idea was to show who's in charge.
So no one entered the village, you fired
No one
from
entered the
a couple
village.
hundred yards
No.
out?
We remained on the railway embankment and fired. The Japanese had Nambu, that's machine guns. I doubt that we did. I don't think I would have had a machine gun group with my platoon, but I might have. I don't remember.
Did you receive any opposing fire?
No.
Nothing?
So, all the way through the rest of my term in the north of China, I don't know that I spent much time thinking about it because things like this were happening. There were stories of other incidents of that sort. And it wasn't until I'd been home a long time that I began to be bothered by this. And at that point I read stuff, and I can't remember what it was, but it became clear to me that the reason for all this happening was that Zheng's troops, the nationalist troops, had moved to, I think, Chongqing, which was way far to the west, had to be a deal with the Japanese. The Japanese wouldn't bother them, way off to the west, which is less populous than the east, and in return, the nationalists would not do anything against the Japanese occupation in the east, in the northeast particularly, because there weren't any incidents that anybody had heard of in connection with that. So, when the time came for the surrender of the Japanese Kwantung Army and the weapons that they had, and some of them were, I suppose, mortars and some heavy weapons of some sort, the question was, to whom would they surrender? The only groups that had been fighting the Japanese in the north of China and Manchukuo, Manchuria, they renamed it Manchukuo, was Mao's Eighth Route Army, and they were doing it as guerrillas. I mean, there were no, I imagine, no pitched battles. They didn't have anywhere near the force to do that. But there had been ongoing fights for something like 14 years since the Marco Polo Bridge incident. And they were the only ones that would have received the Japanese arms in surrender in Mukden and Harbin, the capital of, I don't know which one was capital, in Manchuria, in Manchukuo. So the United States was undertaking to ferry the troops from the far west of the Nationalist Army up into Mukden and Harbin and using the railroad for that purpose. And I can tell you this, I personally saw this. What I carried as a weapon in Okinawa and in China later was a Tommy gun. And mine was pretty well used. I mean, it was operative, of course, but as these nationalist troops came north, and of course we could see them, each man had a brand new Tommy gun. So I assume that the whole thing was to get these troops representing Chung up in Mukden and Harbin to accept the surrender with the Japanese weapons. So all of that, as I say, I worked out later reading about it and thinking about it and all that. And that's the point that really got me. Because the way it was worked out, and I forget his name, the United States had somebody in China trying to negotiate to prevent a renewal of the Civil War. But at the same time, here we were, in fact, playing a considerable role in getting these nationalist troops north. And none of this appeared in the newspapers at the time. My father, knowing I was interested in the thing, would send me copies of the Review of the Week of the New York Times. And, there was no mention of this. Many other things that were being discussed, but not that.
Now, were the Japanese and the Chinese that had cooperated with the Japanese, were there camps near your camp?
Yes, they were. Yes.
Now, who fed and so on these troops? Do you know?
Okay, at the time I can tell you our battalion was stationed at Tangshan, and it was near that the Japanese compound was. I wasn't involved in any of that. But I did hear about it and the fact that there was a single sentry there and that kind of business. And if there was any kind of difficulty of any kind, that we were to somehow get in touch with them. And I'm not sure how that would have been done. I imagine that we would have telephoned battalion, who in turn would have contacted the prisoner compound. But I can't honestly say I was involved.
And you don't know who fed
them? I don't know. No, I have no idea. There was enough of a distance away so that we were not contiguous. We didn't see them. And the other thing I was going to mention was the Russians were complicit in this too, because the war was over. In the last stages of the war, in carrying out the Yalta agreements, they moved into Mukden and Harbin as a part of the joint Allied fight against the Japanese at that point. But they remained. They remained until these troops were brought up from the west, and maybe from the south as well, I don't know, but mainly from the west. So that they had...
Which troops? The nationalist troops or...
Nationalist troops. As the nationalist troops moved up, then the Russians left. And I can't tell you...
So they seem to be supporting Chiang and the
Right.
nationalists over...
I mean, even though they were both theoretically communists, as I read about it later, it seemed that Stalin and Mao didn't get along, and for whatever reason, there's a certain element of jealousy or whatnot, I don't know. But it was very clear that the Russians remained, months after the war ended, I don't know how many months, because I left in January of '46, but they were there until these nationalist troops arrived. And that was a deal, I would suppose, made in Yalta or some other place. Yep.
Were there ever any problems or troubles with Chinese bandits or warlords or anything like that?
Well, I can only say that I wasn't involved. Among the Chinese, while the 8th Route Army of Mao's, and it was not just communists, the whole of anybody who was willing to do anything against the Japanese invasion or occupation was involved. This is something else I wanted to tell you. We talked to some of the people in the Air Corps, and one of the things they told us was that if they were shot down over the north of China, obviously they wouldn't be speaking Chinese. The thing to do was make this sign. That means Ba, 8 in Chinese. They were to call for the 8th Route Army. So in effect, they were pretty much in control. You ask about the warlords, I just don't know, but I think the 8th Route Army, while they weren't able to be a major force against the Japanese, they probably did exert a lot of influence in their own territory. So and we would see them very, very irregularly. Only from time to time we'd see them. I guess that's the answer. Yeah. So, well, just personally, as this realization began to solidify, I can only tell you what it must have looked like to the Chinese to see the three of us, the Marine Corps, the Chinese puppets who had betrayed their own people, and the Japanese firing on this town. You know, if there was any question as to what the attitude of the Chinese would be toward the United States, it's just unthinkable. And, well, it bothered me.
And these puppet Chinese troops then, you're saying, allied with the nationalists?
I don't know.
Or,
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No,
Okay.
that's the size of it. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Well, and I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, because it would have been an incomplete story if